Next up, we have Brian Cogan. Brian is the author of the Encyclopedia of Punk Music and Culture, a professor of media studies, and he's played with both punk and Irish bands. Brian and Richard met at the Go Metric release party last September, and then they also manned a table together at the Small Press Fair in December. Yeah, Brian's going to read you a piece about Richard's parents and his Irish and German backgrounds. Welcome, welcome, Irish Cogan, Brian Cogan.
Fuck's sake, then, what are you getting the expectations of? Richard, I just will say that Richard was a character, and that's the best compliment I can give to anyone, quite frankly. My mother was a Republican, but I forgive her. My father worked for the New York Central Railroad from the time he turned 17 until he retired at age 65. He worked his way up to being a conductor, head conductor, all the way from fireman and then brakeman. On Sundays, he wore a suit and a fedora, like everyone else. On Sunday afternoons, you couldn't tell a lawyer from a working man. People dressed up. There's a celebratory quality to Sunday afternoons. As fireman, my father had to feed the coal into the engine. That was when the trains were still run by steam. My father wasn't a big man, but because of his job, he had huge arms. They once came after him to become a boxer, but my father said he didn't want to hurt anyone. My father's parents were from Germany, but during World War II, it was his job to help transport German POWs to Fort Dix. The troop ships came back from England with the prisoners and docked in Hoboken. He took them from Weehawken west through the woods to Dix. His parents came over from Munich around the turn of the century, but my father only knew a few German words, and he didn't speak with an accent. His parents did not speak Hochdeutsch, High German, but spoke the working class German Plattdeutsch. That's like saying they spoke Cockney instead of Palace English. Me, I had a German last name and an Irish brogue. That was from my mother's side. My mother was an Irish Protestant, and my father was a German Catholic. We didn't go to church. They'd already overcome enough obstacles. Saying my mother's family was Irish Protestant means they were Scotch-Irish. They moved to Ireland from the north of England in the 1700s. There were always Irish jokes around. You put on an exaggerated Irish accent and say, "Were you on the roof when you fell off?" Or, "It's not the cough that'll carry off, it's the coffin that'll carry you often." In another one, an Irish woman is walking down the country lane in Ireland carrying a can of beer on a Sunday. She sees the town priest coming towards her, so she puts the can under her skirt. When the priest comes close enough to see the bulge, he says, "Mrs. O'Reilly, is it a tumor you've got?" "No, it's a cancer." "A cancer?" The Irish love to deprecate death. My mother's father came from County Longford in Ireland. He was a Protestant among Catholics, and he heard about it a few times. In his area, you were supposed to walk in the gutter and give the priest the whole sidewalk when he came walking by. Naturally, my grandfather didn't want to do this, but that plan went over like a lead balloon. So by the time he came to America, he wasn't exactly looking back over his shoulder. Like a lot of immigrants, once he got away from that oppressive atmosphere, he closed the iron door on it. I never heard him wax poetic about Ireland or call it his home. The only story I ever heard from Ireland was a ghost story. He told us that one night he was coming down the lane, probably from the pub, and he saw the ghost of a priest floating over the gravestones. The priest was only a torso, so I guess that took care of the sidewalk problem. On my father's side, the talk was about a certain German cousin. During World War I, this fellow had docked on a Long Island in a U-boat, and then took a trolley car to Manhattan and a ferry to Jersey City. I believe he had visited the family once before, so he knew the way. Well, some of the family found the humor in this. The German cousin crossing the lines, then crossing back, and others thought it was disgraceful, the enemy coming to the house to have a cup of tea. There was a large population of German immigrants ingrained in Hudson County and the area during my childhood, although most of them moved to the suburbs after World War II. But in the 20s and 30s, the local German-American Bund was targeting anyone with a German last name to contribute money to Adolf Hitler. Bund meant association in German, and they had a spot in the Scheutzen Park in North Bergen with a couple of other German clubs. They'd have events that focused on German culture, folk dancing, German food festivals, and that sort of thing. And of course, they'd take dues for membership, and we all know the dues were going to promoting the Nazis. The Bund would come after my father, but he stayed out of it. He didn't like Hitler. Even though he didn't understand German, he heard something in Hitler's voice that he didn't care for. This was early in Hitler's administration when people were getting behind him. They saw him as a kind of savior for the German economy, because he brought in the inexpensive Volkswagen and the Autobahn for commerce and travel. My father saw something between the lines. I used to hear him arguing about it with my uncle. not his brother, but my mother's brother-in-law. I noticed that people who followed a nutcase or follow someone who's mean, they often got mean themselves. My uncle came from a very spoiled background, and he could get mean very quickly. He was used to having his own way. His parents went for Germany, and they owned a movie house and a few delicatessens in northern Jersey. As the moneyed German Americans of that period, it was a point of pride for them to back Hitler. I remember something my father would do to get a big laugh out of my mother. We'd pick up programs from Europe on the shortwave radio. We'd all be sitting around in the living room, listening to broadcasts of one of Hitler's speeches, and this is well before the war. My father could hear a change in Hitler's voice when he was about to start yelling, so when he heard the right tone, he'd say, "Sick 'em, Hitler!" like he was talking to a dog. A moment later, Hitler would go into one of his histrionics, and my mother would fall out of her chair laughing.